First of all, I'd like to thank the organisers for their invitation to speak. I was just reflecting on the panel on unicorns as I was listening to it earlier on this afternoon. And I used to be a partner with Draper Fisher Jurvetson, which is one of the big Silicon Valley blue chip funds for about a decade. And our number one rule, I'll just give you this, we never invested in anybody who was interested in money. That was our number one rule, okay? Never. You have to be interested in your idea, your passion. You've got to show us the belief. So I just add that to your comments from earlier on this afternoon. So what I'd like to talk about is the developing and the emerging markets and the opportunity that they represent for all of us as people who are building companies today. And in fact, just a couple of numbers to help you think about that. 10 markets: South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Turkey, Russia, Mexico, Brazil, India, China, and Indonesia. Those 10 markets, 50% of the world's population live in those 10 markets. Right? That's it. So if you can work in those 10 markets, you can address 50% of the consumers in this planet. Second thing is, those 10 markets are responsible for virtually all the growth in consumer businesses at this present time. If you look at our clients in Brandtone, they're investing in these markets. They're not investing in the US. In fact, they're divesting in the US. They're divesting in Europe. There's no growth, and they're putting all their resources, all their best people, all their energy into those 10 markets. The spending power of consumers in those markets today is $14 trillion. It will be $25 trillion by the end of the decade. It's going to go close to doubling.
So can you see those 10 markets again?
I'll say them again later, okay? And that is, those 10 markets are where the next 1 billion new consumers are coming from. Okay? So there are some good, interesting numbers. Hopefully I've got your attention now on the developing and emerging markets. Now, what are those 1 billion consumers spending the money on and going to spend their money on? Well, first thing a new consumer spends their money on typically is branded consumer goods for their home. Washing powder, personal care, whatever it is. But shortly after that, they start to spend significant amounts of money on education for their children, healthcare for their families, and increasingly financial services products that will secure their future in later life, because the traditional role of children to stay in the house and look after their older family members is no longer the case. They have to provide for themselves for the future. And they represent tremendous opportunities for anybody thinking about either a business-to-business proposition or a business-to-consumer proposition that addresses those areas in those markets. Now, when you're thinking about how you would engage new consumers in the developing and emerging markets, here's another few numbers that'll help you think. If you look at some of these markets, it's fair to say that the infrastructure in these markets could not be described as world-class in many of these markets. However, almost always, in any market you go to anywhere in the world, mobile is world-class. Why? Because it's almost always less than 10 years old. I'll give you an example. Myanmar's got 70 million consumers in Myanmar. It's just opened up. It's just deployed 4 new telco systems, 4G smartphone default. It is the most advanced mobile market in the world. It's 2 years old. Nobody is selling there yet. Everybody is really working hard to get in there and understand the market. Across the world, about 95% of people are on prepaid phones. About 75%, 77% are on functional phones. You must bear that in mind. Less than 25% of the world's population have a smartphone. So I see so many businesses coming to us saying we have a great app, and I'm going, yeah, 3/4 of the world's population can't even look at it. So, you know, for big consumer companies, not really a proper solution, right? Having said that, smartphone penetration is increasing rapidly, But what's more important than smartphone penetration and the limit is that the networks they sit on are getting faster and smarter. You can do more with a smartphone than you ever could before, and that's going to increase exponentially, not because the handsets get smarter, but because the networks get faster and the stuff in the cloud that makes them smart gets even smarter, right? So don't get too fixated on the handset, okay? The handset's just a way of connecting to that brain in the sky over time. Now, when you're thinking about building a business which connects your client to consumers in the new market, the first thing I'd say to you is it's a great opportunity if you focus on the developing and emerging markets. The second thing I'm saying is the most important way of connecting to them is on their phones. There's just no doubt about that. But here's the first new rule for the developing and emerging markets. Your clients are not prepared to pay for connections anymore. They want to pay for relationships. Okay? Not interested. Now, what makes a connection turn into a relationship? It's not technology. It's not state-of-the-art algorithms. It's, in fact, values. It's, does the person on the other end of the connection trust you? Do they give their permission? Do you ask their permission, and do you respect the permissions they give in terms of how you engage with them? And is that experience rewarding? If you don't engage on the basis of trust, permission, and reward, connections, no matter what technology you use, will never turn into relationships. And in the end, our clients and your clients are no longer interested in buying connections. That's a commodity. They're interested in relationships. Connections have been commoditized. If you want a margin, if you want a premium business, it's relationships. So that's the first rule. Relationships, not connections. In that context, how do you build a relationship with somebody? Well, the first thing you've got to do is get their attention, whether it's one-on-one in this room or whether it's through a cloud and a mobile handset. And it's a war for attention. I was standing up at the back today during the presentations by your ministers and your various dignitaries. And excuse me for saying this, but one speech was very boring. The others were very good. During that speech, I was looking down from the back, every single screen lit up. Everybody took their phone out, their laptop out, and went online during that talk. Every single person in the room, with probably two exceptions. The few people in the room here in the front who couldn't get away with it. Okay, because somebody would see them. But I took a picture, actually. I was going to put the picture in my talk, but I didn't have time. Every single screen. I was looking from the back down. All I saw was screens. Nobody was looking at that screen. Nobody. The guy was talking to the roof. Might as well not have been here. Okay? It's a war for attention. If you look, think about your life at home. I've got kids, I've got teenagers, right? I've got everything from 10 up to 20, right? So we might be sitting around the evening in our house. TV, 2 laptops, 4 phones, a couple of Game Boys, PlayStation, multiple screens demanding multiple sources of attention, screaming for attention. Fact of the matter is you can only pay attention to one at a time. It is a war for attention. And you must show your clients you can win that war for attention. If you can't, they won't invest. Now, here's the other thing that's really starting to change our business. Cognitive science. We're starting to really understand why people pay attention to stuff and why they don't. Now, really boring speech is fairly obvious, right? But, having said that, I think there might be a laser thing here, is there? No, I don't know. Okay, the paradigm of advertising and marketing has always been, if you make it delightful, if you make it entertaining, if you make it interesting, somebody will pay attention. It's actually 100% the other way around. If you're paying attention, you find something interesting and engaging. So what this graph here shows, I won't go into it in detail, this point here, which is when we are most paying attention and most engaged is when we're making love. Why? It's biologically programmed for the future of the species. Okay? If we didn't find making love interesting, we wouldn't exist as a species. So we are hardwired to pay 100% attention during that time, and therefore we find it very engaging. Here's the interesting thing. Even if you're doing your taxes and you're paying attention, you find it engaging. What you don't find engaging is anything you're doing that causes your mind to wander. So if you're drifting, if your mind is drifting, it doesn't matter how nominally engaging it could be, like a symphony orchestra or a football match. If your mind is wandering from that to the other things that are going on in your life, you will not be engaged, you will not be interested, and you will not pay attention. So what we're doing as part of our business, the only thing I'm going to talk about in terms of Brandtone, we're actually measuring how much attention you pay to the content we deliver to you. And it turns out that if you're paying attention, there's a part of your brain that generates a chemical called noradrenaline, and that causes your pupil to dilate. So when you look at a piece of media we show you on the phone, we use the forward-looking camera to measure how much your eye dilates. And we measure how much attention you're paying, so we know how much that is delighting you or engaging you. Okay? And that brings me to another point. So, war for attention, and you must understand how you're going to demonstrate to your clients you are getting somebody's attention. And there's a huge revolution in the understanding of what causes people to pay attention going on at the moment. The second rule for new markets, indeed all markets, is it's all about outputs, not inputs. Nobody pays the industry anymore for beautiful content. They don't pay them for great technology. They pay them for results. Okay? So let me give you an example of that. There's a recent deal announced by Accenture where they put in a whole new digital route to market solution for Pizza Hut. And how do they get paid? They get paid per slice of pizza. Okay? Now, if that's happening at Accenture, it's only a matter of time before it happens to creative agencies and everybody else. So what will be increasingly the case in the modern world, okay, is that through the use of technology, you will be required to measure the output, okay? And you will be paid for that, not for the input. And that'll drive one other thing, which is you will then start to A/B test your inputs. So we will be optimizing the inputs in real time to maximize the outputs. So you're going to outcomes-based marketing, like outcomes-based medicine, and you will be paid for outcomes. You will not be paid for an amazing piece of creativity. You will not be paid for an amazing algorithm. You will be paid for how many slices of pizza get sold. You will be paid for how many people book a room or whatever it happens to be. So you will be paid for outputs, not inputs. Final point, if you really want a successful business, you've got to think globally from day one, not locally. Okay? So one of the advantages countries like Egypt, and where I come from, Ireland, right, is the internal market, in our case, is tiny. There's 4 million people in Ireland. So you can never build a successful business of scale in Ireland. So from day one, you're thinking about those 10 countries. Day one. Okay? In this country, you have a larger indigenous population, but the market's not as developed. So again, you're thinking about other markets, right? Now, this market will become a valuable market over time, but at the moment, probably isn't as valuable as it will be in the future. So you must think about a business that is global from day one, not local. Now, you may build it locally, get your proof points, raise your cash, but then my point is it's just as easy, right, to do business through the cloud in those 10 markets as it is in some more difficult parts of Egypt to reach. So why not put your product out into Indonesia and China and India and Russia and all those other places from day one? It's not that hard to do, I can tell you, because we've done it many times. It is not that difficult. You think it's going to be difficult. It's not that difficult at all, and you have a huge addressable market. So, key points I want to make is, when you're thinking about building your business, the next 1 billion consumers are coming from those 10 markets, and now I'll repeat them. South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Turkey, Russia, Mexico, Brazil, India, China, and Indonesia. Those 10 markets, 50% of the world's population live in them, and in 10 years' time it'll be more than 50%, right? Focus on those markets. That's where all the new consumers are. And if you're focusing on engaging consumers in those markets, it's all about the mobile channel. And remember two key things. You will be, first of all, paid for relationships, not connections. You will be paid for outputs, not inputs. And therefore, you've got to measure everything in real time. So you have to start thinking about the phone not only as a channel for communication in the traditional sense, but also as, in effect, a sensor, a real-time sensor of what's happening to your consumer, to the product, to your client. And that will be the evidence you gather to defend what you're earning from that client. So when you're also thinking about your business, think globally from day one. It doesn't mean you have to act globally from day one, but think globally from day one so that you're future compatible. When that business is able to scale, you're not going, oh, if only I'd have thought about what we needed in other markets from day one, I wouldn't be in the situation now where I've run out of money or whatever it happens to be. And the final thing, just go back to my original point, you know, if you make money out of this, that's great. The first 2 or 3 startups you do, you probably won't. That's the honest truth. You'll fail. I failed. Failed my first 2 startups spectacularly, right? But you learn, right? And as you learn, you know how to do this better and better. And honestly, when I set up a company now, I genuinely don't expect it to fail anymore. Unless I'm very unlucky, because I've made a ton of mistakes and I've got a lot of experience and I've gathered a network of people around me who can help me avoid most of the really bad mistakes. Okay? You have to serve your time. But do serve your time. Don't expect to make $1 billion on day one. That never happens. You know, it's like winning the lottery. Don't plan your life around winning the lottery. Build 10 million business. Next time get it to 100 million. Next time it'll get to $1 billion. Okay? Okay, thank you very much. I don't know how much time I have. If anybody wants to ask questions. Do I have any time for questions? Yeah, so if anybody wants to ask a few questions, more than welcome.
As you go in the business, you need to have some kind of mentor to help you in your business, to help you in your life. So how do you seek mentors? How do you find them?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is an awful lot of people nowadays are thinking about going straight from college to starting businesses. Personally, I wouldn't recommend that. I would genuinely, in many cases, suggest a good way to go about things is to work for either another company, particularly a big international company. Those companies are very good at doing stuff. So let's say you're interested in healthcare, for example. Go and work for a big healthcare company and learn the industry, right? And then maybe go and work in somebody else's startup and really learn your craft, right? Learn the industry, learn how a startup works, and then have a go yourself. If that takes you 2 or 3 years, it's a great investment, right? Now, some people go straight out of college and do a startup and it's successful. You hear about them because that's the exception, okay? That's the truth, right? Most of the time people who do that, they don't have enough experience, they don't have a network that helps them get through to a successful outcome. Now, more and more governments also, and I was very interested in listening to the Minister and the Governor and various other people this morning, there seems to be a lot of effort going into building the support and the infrastructure necessary to support entrepreneurs in the Egyptian economy. And I think that also is something that you can leverage off. The Chamber of Commerce, the business schools, et cetera, right? So I think, you know, that's one way. Another way, and it's what I did, is I went to live in San Francisco for 4 years. And I learned I made loads of mistakes there in somebody else's money, and then came back to Ireland and started doing it there, right? So going abroad is another great way of learning things, you know, and getting an appreciation of the outside world. I think, anybody else?
Yeah.
Sorry.
You mentioned Kenya, Nigeria.
Yeah.
10 markets, right?
Yeah.
I don't think they're much different than what we have in Egypt. I think.
They are slightly, they are somewhat different. I'll tell you why.
Are they the developed markets?
No, yes and no, okay? So Kenya is a very important market because Kenya has about 50 million people. But Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique are what are called the East African Free Trade Area. And virtually every one of our clients who does something in Kenya does exactly the same thing in those other 3 countries. So it's de facto a 200 million person market. Actually 250 almost. Likewise, Nigeria. Nigeria is 220 million people. Now it's a little bit rocky at the moment because no, it's 220. Yep. And it's the largest GDP in the whole of Africa. Okay. Now, obviously, with the oil issue at the moment, things are quite depressed there, but that's life, you know. That's the ups and downs of life, right? Again, you've got Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire. You've got West African free trade blocs starting to emerge.
Do they have free trade?
No, not formally yet, but it's starting to happen. So our clients who run businesses campaigns in Nigeria typically run exactly the same business in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and a couple of other countries, right? So they work out to be much more than the individual country, right? So if you want to cover Africa, I would say then it's Egypt, Kenya, South Africa, and Nigeria. South Africa gives you Botswana, it gives you Zimbabwe, Zambia, the same thing. All the same distribution channels, all the same, you know, regional teams, etc., right? So they're like mini Dubais from like the previous talk, okay? So that's why we chose those. It's not necessarily that any one market itself is 300 million people, although if you look at Indonesia, it's 280 million people, one market, okay? Yeah.
Rather than making money. Because a lot of ideas that are actually beneficial to the country, people will say that that doesn't make money, so they don't invest in it or they don't want to look at your pitch, your idea, your pitch.
Okay, so the way our business is structured, so this is not a talk about Brandtone, but I mean, I'll tell you a little bit about Brandtone because it answers this question. We have about 70 people working in Dublin, and that's our global hub, and from there we run our platform, put it up in the cloud, make our products available globally to anybody who wants them. And then in those 10 markets, we have a team of 5 or 6 people in each market who take that product and work with it with our clients in the local markets to tailor the product specifically for that market. So for example, if we're engaging somebody on mobile in a Muslim country, for example, like Egypt, it's very important that if a woman answers the phone, it's not a male voice, for example. That's just a fact, okay? Likewise, let's say, for example, in Brazil, India, there's 22 languages we work in. It's very important that whatever language that consumer needs to engage with us in, we pick the right language, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So you try and get like 90% of your product up in the cloud and standard, and then there's the shell that goes on your product in each market that localizes it. Now you want to keep that as small as possible, but you have to do it. Right? Otherwise you won't get through, particularly with consumer-led engagement, you won't get through the cultural barriers, you won't get through the local competitive barriers, whatever it happens to be, right? So does that help you with that question? So, but that's, you know, that's what we call in Ireland a micro multinational. It's kind of like an emerging model. It's one that's maybe of interest here in Egypt as well. There's loads of companies in Ireland that are 200-300 people, that have 100 people in Ireland and 100 people around the world. And they can be in 10, 15, 20 markets. So they're genuine multinationals. They have a product in Dublin, goes up in the cloud, drops down into the 15, 20 markets around the world that company needs to meet the needs of. And then there's a small team in each market that does the localization. Now, why do you want to do that? Because if you want to do business with clients like ours, Unilever or Mondelez or PepsiCo, whatever, they won't buy from you unless you can deliver a solution that works in most of their important markets, right? So no matter how good your product is in South Africa, Unilever are never going to buy from you globally or regionally if that's all you can do, right? So somebody else is going to come in and say, well, you know, Brandtone's very good in South Africa, but we'll do the whole of Africa, or we'll do the whole of Middle East or whatever, so they get the business. So, but it's really remarkable. 100 people, 50 in your local country here, say Egypt, 50 in well-chosen local markets, you can address 2-3 billion consumers with that team alone. Right? It's never been before possible, and that's what the cloud and connectivity does for us, particularly with mobile being a ubiquitous device, terminal for everybody. You can talk to 2-3 billion people with a team of 100 people. Right? It's remarkable. It's never been possible before. Right, I'll finish up. Oh, this lady up the back here, sorry.
Just a question. So for a startup, doing all the different languages and also some of the legal regulations, I'm just curious how you overcome that. I know startups are just trying to enter the European market face so many different regulations. How do you advise your clients on that?
Well, first of all, you know, we've confined ourselves to 10 markets, pretty much, those 10. And we have teams of 5 or 6 people in each market. They're typically a general manager, a technology specialist and an operations specialist who covers all the regulatory stuff as well, a salesperson and a marketing person, roughly speaking, right? And it's the job of the technical and the operational people to make sure that we're fully compliant in every market. Now, the good thing about being a European Union company is that if you're compliant with, you know, consumer protection law or privacy law or data law in European Union, as we have to be in every country we operate in because we're a European Union country, we're almost always over-compliant in those markets. So by simply meeting the European standard, which we have to no matter where we operate in the world because we're a European company, we're often very, very good shape. And what we're finding increasingly is across Africa, Middle East, Asia, is that European consumer and data and privacy laws are actually being used as the model for the local legislation. And so often it's very, very similar as well, right? And then often too, the telco regulatory models are quite similar as well and often copied from Europe. I mean, Europe just often gets a bad press, right? But in fact, Europe is very, very much in the forefront of building sustainable digital businesses. You know, and I think when the shakeout happens and we look at this period and how many sustainable companies came out of this sort of first flush, I'd say a lot of them will be in Europe. Okay. Okay, thank you very much.